How would you classify your friendship with others? My next guest tells us there are three primary components to biblical friendship. Stay tuned as we learn what it really means to be a friend. How do I bring my faith to work? How do I tap into the power of God in my work-life call? Why am I going through this adversity? Is God mad at me? I'm Oz Hillman, and I've been helping leaders like you answer these questions and more for over 30 years. That's what this podcast is all about. Let's learn and grow together. Welcome to TGIF, Today God is First. Well, welcome everybody to this week's TGIF at Work podcast. It's great to have you, and it's great to have a special guest that I've just gotten to know recently, Dr. Greg Books. And what a great name, Books, for a writer. Anyway, Greg has served as the executive level in both nonprofit and for-profit organizations as a university professor and administrator, and as a founding pastor and teaching pastor ordained in 1990. He's also been a frequent speaker on campus, at campus ministry and men's conferences around the nation. And I just got to know Greg from a book he had sent me and called The Audacity of Friendship, Finding Community in the Age of Isolation. And we're going to talk about that today. And Greg, it's really good to have you on our podcast this week.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, this is an interesting topic. It's not a topic that you run into that often in books. What kind of motivated you to, get into this area and actually write a whole book about it?
Well, friendship is one of those relationships that we think we know what it means. And it's very important to us, but it's something we don't examine very often. My background in teaching classics, first century oral culture, literature, history of communication, it really piqued my interest when I would pick up these ancient texts and see them spending just hours and hours and hours discussing the meaning of friendship. And then we spend so little time talking about it. I was struck by the fact that Jesus would say, "I've called you friends." And I just wondered, what would people have heard when he said that?
Yeah.
If I said that to my kids, they'd say, "Jesus wants to see more pictures of your cat." It's got to be something other than that. So that really compelled me to go into it and study it further.
Yeah. If you really think about what Jesus said, I've called you friends. It's actually quite profound. I once had a mentor who became my spiritual father in the marketplace. I asked him to mentor me, and he says, "Well, I don't really do mentoring, but I will be your friend." and that turned out to be quite profound, because I was able to gain from him because of the friendship. Even though he was mentoring me, he didn't see it that way. He saw it through the lens of friendship.
Yes.
So what motivated you to write it?
Well, in part, I had to teach courses in communication. And communication, of course, is about relationships. And I would teach students the formal theories of friendship. But the conversation would always tell me that their experience wasn't like the formal models that we used. Our models, which come from 1950s psychology, are based on exchange of interpersonal information at risk. Mm-hmm. But every one of these people would tell me that they had friendships that didn't fit the model. Those were the friends that went back to early childhood. Maybe they hadn't seen them or talked with them, but they were the friend that if they met them, it would be as if they'd never had any space or time in between. But they were friends that had their back, they could trust them, they were constant, and they were committed. And it just didn't seem to fit the model. And that, plus the fact that Jesus made that invitation, I had to find out what that meant.
Now, one of the things you say in the book is you talk about the difference between oral cultures and our culture today. What do you mean by that?
Well, oral cultures are those where there's no reading or writing. In Jesus' day, about 1% to 3% of the population could read or write, and that was unusual. Most of them were servants. They were scribes. They were people who were keeping accounts or keeping books for people who have importance.
Hmm.
So when you think about the fact that 1 in 100 or 3 in 100 could read or write, that's very different from today, where we feel like everything that's important to know is going to be written down. To give you an illustration, in an oral culture, you need to have at least 2 people to learn anything. You can't learn anything in isolation. You have to have 1 speaker, 1 hearer. Jesus said, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I'm there in the midst. We teach about relationships as you and I, but actually it's you, I, and Jesus in the midst. That's a very different approach than a literate culture would bring to it. Today, according to the best estimates from linguists, there's approximately 10,000 languages spoken in the world today. Fewer than 300 are what we would consider to be literate. By that I mean they have all of their stories of, origin and where they're going and what's significant in writing. Everything else is oral.
Wow.
So bottom line, we've only had orality for about 100 years in the United States. Compulsory literacy in our schools for only about 100 years. But the whole sweep of human history has been oral. We are the unusual outliers in human history, those of us who read and write.
So what do you think the difference in how Jesus modeled friendship was compared to our friendships today?
Well, I need to go back, take kind of a step back and look at what our contemporary model of friendship is. Okay. It goes back to 1958, a researcher by the name of Mark Knapp. And I cover this in some detail in the book chapter. But Knapp looked at interpersonal communication as the foundation of a relationship based on exchange of information that I know about myself that you don't know about me. And what he described was basically games, a game, like a card game. I disclose something to you that you don't know. There's risk. You accept it. You reciprocate by disclosing something about me. We've made a connection. As we get further into our relationship, we disclose more about ourselves to the other person, which takes it to the next level. Now, this thinking is so deeply ingrained in our thinking that we talk about friendships on levels. Let's take it to the next level. It's become the language that we think about friendship through. We continue to become more formal in that relationship as we disclose more interpersonal information at greater risk, until we reach a point where the stakes are too high, or we feel that the information is simply not strong enough. And at that point, like a card game, we fold. And the relationship starts to fall apart because we're not feeding it with interpersonal information. That's the modern view. It's very performative. It's very contractual. It's based upon information exchange only and self-disclosure. That's very different than an oral culture. In an oral culture, when you call someone a friend, you are creating it by speaking it. You're inviting them into a relationship, but you're making it at the same time as you speak it. And to speak that friendship, you've really are making 3 offers or 3 commitments to that other person. Number 1, I take pleasure in your company. Number 2, everything I have is yours. And number 3, I'm committing everything to helping you work out balance, moderation, practical wisdom, and maturity. You notice how none of those have anything to do with me? In the contemporary model, your disclosure affirms me. In this classical model.
Yeah, I would imagine based on those 3 criteria, if we looked at the percentage of people who have deep level friendship based on that criteria, it would have to be pretty small.
It's very small, but it's intuitive and it's natural to us. And that's where I've said that we all have an experience of a friend or 2 like that.
Well, just by knowing that now that you've given that to us, kind of inspires us to evaluate our current friendships to see where we might be falling short
Yeah.
in having a real deep committed friendship. That's
Yes.
what I think of when I hear you say that. I want to go back and look at, okay, how about this friendship? Where am I on that one, that one, that
Yeah.
one?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm really hoping that what the book will do is make us thankful for the friendships that the Lord has given us that are like that. To go back to the idea of orality and literacy, we think of ourselves as literate beings. I don't think we are. We are oral beings, and some of us have a veneer of literacy, but it's really hard to attain and it's really hard to maintain. If you've ever taught kids and you have them come back after a summer when they haven't been reading, it's amazing how much they've forgotten. And you have to go back and get them back into reading and thinking in a logical manner again. So I really think that the kind of friendship Jesus offers us, which is directed entirely to the other person, that's intuitive. We're wired that way.
Mm.
And we form those friendships until we're taught by formal methods to ignore those friendships and walk away from them.
How many realistic, what I would say, level 3 friendships do you think a person could really have?
I've never tried to put a number on it, but I really don't think that a person can balance any more than maybe one or two at a time. You may have friendships like that that appear or disappear. You don't talk to them for a while, but then something comes up and you need to talk with them. There's a crisis or a problem. They need your input, your consolation. You're there for them. So I think we can have friendships like that. And my experience has been throughout all the things that I've done, I probably have one or two good friends from each of those phases. I'm not in contact with them at all times, but at any one time, if one of those people were to contact me or I were to contact them, there would be that connection and that relationship there.
Now, one of the things in the title is the audacity of friendship, this word audacious. Why did you use that term for friendships?
Because that kind of a friendship is almost scary. Okay. The degree of access. Go back to Jesus saying to you, I take pleasure in your company. That flips it around completely, doesn't it? We think that we're supposed to take pleasure in his company. He can take us or leave us. But he says, I take pleasure in your company. What's mine is yours. And I'm committing everything to helping you work out balance and moderation. Whatever, whenever, the access that gives us, the privilege that gives us is just amazing. And you can see that illustrated throughout Scripture. For instance, by the friend who goes to his friend because another friend has come to him at night and he needs bread. The person with bread says, no, I'm not interested in getting up. The friend in the middle says, I'm going to keep knocking on your door because you made a commitment to me as a friend. I need what you have. And if I don't keep knocking on the door, I'm failing you as a friend. I'm letting you get away with less than your best. So there's almost a responsibility to demand the best of the other person. And that's a frightening thing.
Yeah.
So
have you watched this Chosen series?
I've not watched it completely.
Oh, wow. I don't know if you've watched enough to see how Jesus is portrayed in that. I wonder if you have, how do you feel about how he's portrayed in his friendship role to the disciples?
I think they've done, from what I've seen, I think they've done a very, very good job of depicting that openness.
Yeah,
that complete commitment. Yeah. So the other illustration I was going to use for audacious is Abraham, because there's two very important things that often get overlooked in that exchange. One is that the Lord says, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Because I know him. I know what he'll do. When Abraham sees the Lord come, he says, step aside, sit down, comfort yourself. Isn't that why you've come to me? I know why you've come. I know what you'll do. And Abraham actually gets in front of the Lord and says, you can't do this. This is not your best. Mercy has to triumph over judgment. And the responsibility and the opportunity, both sides, to get in front of the Lord like Abraham and say, you can't do that. You're better than that. That's amazing.
Years ago, before I went through a major crash and God really transformed my life through it, I knew that I had been fairly shut down emotionally in relationships. And so most of my relationships had been activity based,
yes.
Say on the golf course or playing basketball or tennis or whatever. It was activity based relationships. And a mentor who was walking with me in that season, he says, you don't have any close friendships. I'll bet you can't tell me the guys you play golf with, how many kids they have, and he really stuck it to me. And it really, even to this day, I think about that when I play golf quite regularly, and I'm really motivated to engage with those that I meet on the golf course. I meet a lot of new people, and it gives me an opportunity to really share. But it also gives me the opportunity to dig deeper into people's lives rather than just go through the day, chit chat and not engage emotionally with that person. And if you're watching this, I'm sure that some of this might be touching you, that maybe you've got activity-based relationships and maybe you haven't gotten to that level 3. In fact, I'd like you to repeat those 3 major components for everybody to get that.
Right. The major components of a classical friendship is a commitment that I take pleasure in your company, number 1. Number 2, everything I have is yours. And number 3, I am committing everything to helping you work out balance, moderation, practical wisdom, and maturity to be the best you can be.
That's good. Yeah. So if somebody's listening to us today, what would be some really good reasons why they should read this book?
I think, to go back to what I had said about all of us having those friendships, I think, first of all, to help us be thankful for the friends that the Lord has given us in that way. Second, to help us in our relationship with Him, to really enter into that friendship that He's given us, or He's invited us to, because that is so freeing, not to have performance as the basis of your relationship with Him. I mean, if I have to disclose something about myself that He doesn't know, I'm not going to get anywhere because He knows everything. But for Him to say that He takes pleasure in my company is just so encouraging to me and with people that I share it with. So to celebrate what He's given us, to strengthen and deepen with what we have as far as our opportunity with Him. And then also, I believe that this is the relationship that He wants us to offer to the world around us. It's what He offered to us. It's what He wants us to offer to people around us, because I believe that's what people are hungry for. Not more contacts on Facebook, but those people who will say, I've got your back no matter what.
When I think about those 3 components, I think about David and Jonathan in the Old Testament, how, it started out through just the relationship with this King Saul, but over time, there was a kindredness between the 2 of them, and they got to the point of willing to die for each other. And so I think that's a great model to look at. In fact, if you haven't seen this, there's a new series out on Amazon Prime called The Life of David, that they're capturing David's personality really, really well from his teen years going into it. It's in its first series as we speak today. But anyway, that's a good one to look at as well.
There's an interesting aspect of that also is illustrated by friendship, and that is that the promise of friendship to you, that commitment to you, that goes to future generations. It doesn't end with you and me. It goes to your children and their children and their children. When David, towards the end of his life, asked if there was anybody left of the household of Jonathan that he had an obligation to, it was because of that commitment of friendship. And they
Yeah.
brought Mephibosheth to the court, and he said, "You eat at my table, you eat my food. I have an obligation to your father to
Mm.
care for you." Which is why in Proverbs it says, "In times of trouble, don't go to your brother, go to your father's friend."
Yeah. So the book is called The Audacity of Friendship, Finding Community in the Age of Isolation. Um, Talk about that for a moment, the age of isolation. Where are we in this technology age as it relates to its effect on friendships?
It's completely eroded friendship. It's redefined friendship to be something that's completely dissatisfying, and completely surface. There's no commitment whatsoever. In fact, I really think that some of these online forums where people go out and they express everything, they disclose everything to strangers with no response whatsoever, and any response that they do get simply is self-affirming. I think that is mechanistic friendship taken to its unsatisfying extreme. And I think, if anything, what COVID showed us is just how thin and how insufficient those relationships are that are based on that type of friendship only.
Most people can be divided into two camps. They're either relational or they're transactional.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very, very transactional in my earlier years. And it took a crash for me to understand what it meant to relate to other people on a relational level. And one of my board members, Ford Taylor, teaches extensively on relationship leadership versus transactional leadership. And we really should be something called relational, where you combine the two.
Combine the two.
So that, because there's times where you have to be transactional, but there's times where you must be relational, and each camp wants the other to change. So we need to
the practical wise person who has had a friend who's helped them come, your mentor, come to the point of knowing when it's appropriate to be transactional and when it's appropriate to be relational.
Yeah, because we have to have both to be effective, and we will be much more effective if we know the balance between those two and walk consistently in those.
Correct. Great.
Well, this has been great. Tell us where to find the book, and I want to encourage everybody to get this book. It's something that we all need to have this put into our spirits.
So, the book's available in a couple different formats. In print version, it's available on my website, which is www.drgregbooks.com. It's DRGREGBOOKS.com. I do have a link directly to Ingram Spark to order it, and there's a special pricing that's less than Amazon. Of course, it is available on Amazon in print, and it's also available in the Kindle PDF version on Amazon and in audio version, and that would be Kindle, Apple, Kobo, and there's any number of the platforms, Audible, etc. Whatever you use, it should be available on that.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Greg, for being with us today, and I pray that we'll all be better friends after understanding these three core things that is our goal to have in our friendships. God bless.
Pleasure. Thank you. God bless too.